Welcome back. Super excited. In this lecture we are going to go into step 2, which is creating and verifying our data set. So in this particular lecture, I'm going to demonstrate how to go about actually not only just to create a data set by using the Kernel command, but also how to verify your data set. So in the previous step 1, we actually just defined the labels, right? We took a look at the CSV file, the structure of our data, see what questions were there and what kind of labels were there. So there were 5 labels essentially that were part of the CSV file. So in this lecture, let's jump right in, and I'm going to demonstrate how to go about actually creating the data set using Kernel command, and also how to verify it. So first we use the data to create a data set, which makes sense, and then the following command is actually used to do so. So I'm going to use curl -x post and so on, so you can see the entire command that is displayed right on your screen. And I'm going to provide this so that as a downloadable resource you can just copy the command as well. A couple of important things about this particular command. What does it actually do for us? So what I've done is I've highlighted the yellows is the actual curl syntax, right? The actual options that we're going to use. For example, the -x, the -h, and then there's a f as well, -f, right? And then the option in red is simply where we need to actually provide the file path. In other words, where the file is going to come from. So we need to provide the URL. Okay? So once we create the data set from the specified CSV file, it's going to go ahead and create 5 labels as specified within the CSV, and then about 150 records. That's the total number of records in the CSV file. So once we successfully create that, next we are going to use the curl command again to verify, and similar syntax, right? -x, -h, and -h. In this instance, the options in red where you see token, recall from previous lesson, this token is something that we created as a prerequisite, right? So go back a couple of lectures, find your token. And then the data set ID, which is going to be created once you actually create the data set, in the first option here on top. So once you create the actual data set, it will provide you the data set ID. We need to copy the data set ID and then run to verify our data set. So you get the idea, right? But let me in fact elaborate a little further. If you're comfortable with the curl syntax and options, no big deal. But for those of my students who would like to know a little bit more about what -x option does, what -h does, what is this, then I've put together the entire resource list as a downloadable resource. You can download it and just kind of read through some of the syntax. I'm only going to highlight and talk about the important ones that are displayed here. So the -x, -h, and -f. So here's the relevant command. This is the -x. We use that as a request. It's also called the request command. So the hypertext transfer protocol specifies a custom request method to use when communicating with the server. So the specified request will be used instead of the method otherwise used, which defaults to get. So here we're asking to retrieve the HTTP. So it's going to read the hypertext transfer protocol specs for details and explanations, and so on. So we are going to use our -x in this command, and again you can read through it. I will provide the resource. Next command is the -f, which is the form command, and this lets curl emulate a filled-in form in which a user has pressed or submit the button. This causes curl to post data using the multi-form part, and we have specified that in our syntax. And there are several other options. For instance, if you don't need a file coming from the URL, you can place the file on your local hard drive and then provide the path accordingly after the -f or the form command. And then finally the header, which is the -h. This is the extra header to use when getting a web page. So you may specify any number of extra headers if you choose to. Note that if you should use or add a custom header that has the same name as the one of the internal ones Kernel would use, your externally set header will be used instead of the internal one. So I just want to kind of highlight some of the areas that you want to be careful of. So I just wanted to run through these 3 different commands that we are actually going to use in our syntax, and you can kind of take a look and of course read through it, understand it. If you have any questions, just feel free to post. Alright, perfect. So once we know the steps that we're going to do in this lecture, right? So we are going to create the data set using the Kernel command, and then we are going to verify it. Perfect. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and run the Kernel command here and provide a file path. And since we're using a sample data set, we are going to use the same file path that is available online, a URL where the data set is going to be actually fetched from and then created. So once that is created, I'm going to go ahead and verify it running the next set of command. So I've copied the command and I'm going to paste it, so it just saves a little bit of time. So in order to paste, by the way, within the command line editor tool such as Cygwin here, just use the wheel on your mouse, click on the wheel, and it's going to paste it. So here we go, just a shortcut for all of the developers. It works. So once the command is pasted, notice the path here. The file is going to be fetched from einstein.ai/text and then case-routing-intent.csv. You could use any other path. So if you have, let's say, a web server, you can throw the file up on the web server and then provide the path. And like I mentioned earlier, you could use a local computer, your own computer, and provide a path here. So it just depends on your own requirement. So once you have specified the actual Kernel command, I'm going to hit enter key. And by the way, just a word of caution, if you do get the server 500 HTTP error, just paste again and hit the enter key again, and keep doing so until you get the result. So in this instance, we got the result the very first time, and the important thing here to note is the ID, which is 1055196, because this ID is going to be used as a dataset ID in the next set of commands. The token remains the same, but the dataset ID is fetched from the result of the first command that we ran. Okay, so here's the important part. So you may want to save the ID here somewhere in Notepad or somewhere else. So let's go ahead and run the next set of commands. This is going to verify our data set, whether it's succeeded or not, because in this example, notice the total examples is 0, which is the number of records, right? Because it didn't really fetch the 150 records that are part of the CSV file. So it just says as status is uploading. So we don't know exactly whether it was successful or not. So that's the reason why we ran the second set of command, which is to verify the data set. So I'm going to go ahead and paste the second syntax here. And then notice the data set is 1055196, which matches our result from the first command. So I'm going to hit the enter key. And this is exactly what I mentioned earlier. If you do get the error 500 server error, just paste again and hit the enter key again, right? And you got to keep trying it, because sometimes it works, sometimes you got to try it a couple of times or even 3 or 4 times. So perfect. So we do get the result here, and notice in this result I'm looking for the status message, right? There we go. So it's succeeded. So it's successfully created, and now the data set is verified. And what happens is it gives you the, of course, the ID remains the same for the CSV file, but for each of the labels you get the dataset ID, and then within the dataset ID you get the num examples, or each ID is different, right? So for instance, the main dataset ID remains the same for the file, but within the dataset, the main ID, you have the IDs for each of the labels as well. What I've done is I've put together in Sublime, which is the editor here, this particular syntax. It's sometimes difficult to read when you're actually working within the command line tool interface. So as an example, I'm going to go ahead and open up Sublime here and give you the first step. So our first step was to create the data set, and this is the result. So let me bring up command line tool here. There we go. So let me scroll up to the first set of result right here. So all I've done here is, instead of leaving it in the command line tool interface in Cygwin, I've copied it to the Sublime window. So it's easy to read that way. Okay. Notice this is not the exact or identical result, because this is just a syntax. I wanted to show you how you can actually take it into Sublime and code it this way, because it's easier to read in this fashion, whereas reading it across within the command line tool editor, right? So similarly, the verification, which is step 2, you can notice that you have the ID, the name, and everything else. So it's just the syntax that you can actually navigate and create accordingly, so that it's easier for you to take a look at. All right, perfect. Let's go back, bring up our command line tool editor here. There we go. Now scroll down. So we have successfully verified so far our data set. So practice with this. Hope this helps, and let's move to the next lesson, which is step 3.